good afternoon to everyone. I'm Samu Kurri, Head of Institutional Supervision for the Finnish FSA. And the topic of my presentation is applying macroprudential instruments, first experiences from Finland. And with first experiences, I mean that we have now been doing macroprudential policy for over 2 years, from the beginning of 2015. And because the organizational structures differs between EU countries, maybe I should mention that the FSA is the designed macropru authority in Finland, and the decisions are made by the board of the FSA. So if I start with this big picture, kind of big macro picture, I mean that first of all, in the early 90s in Finland, like in other Nordic countries too, we had a big banking crisis. It's shown with the shaded area here. But in 2008-2009, when the modern financial crisis ran over the Western globe at least, we didn't have a financial crisis in Finland. Despite of that, our GDP dropped like 8% in 1 year, and our economy has been doing quite badly, but it's not related of a housing bubble or not related of problems within banks. It's more about the structural issues. Some big firms, some big industries have been in problems. But anyway, the starting point is that the household indebtedness, it has doubled in 20 years from year 2000 or year 1999. And most of the increase was fastest before the financial crisis. After that, the trend, the increase rate has been slower, but still it has kept increasing. And when we compare ourselves to other EU countries, when we compare ourselves to the other Nordics, our indebtedness levels like 127% compared to the disposable income, it looks like quite low number if you compare to the Swedish numbers, Norwegian numbers, and especially the Danish numbers. But when you compare those to the EU or Eurozone averages, our numbers are on the higher side. So we are worried about on that. And I mean that before I joined the FSA, I used to work at the Bank of Finland, and I remember doing this presentation for our governor that the increase in household indebtedness is a thing that we should be worried about. We said that when the indebtedness rate was like 107%. A year later it was 112. We say that we are very worried. A year after that, 115, we were still very worried, but nothing happened. So obviously we need some tools to solve the issue. Okay, so what are the current issues? What are the kind of problem we are standing in front of? One thing is that we have structurally high indebtedness in the household sector. But at the same time, currently, probably because of the economic situation, we have no significant overvaluation in housing prices. Another thing is that there's a strong ongoing branchification of the Finnish market. So there are systemically significant branches. Before, up to let's say 2016, maybe 5% of our banks, the banks operating in Finland, were branches. What happened in January was that Nordea, the largest bank in Nordics, its Finnish part in Finland became a branch. And that means that currently roughly 40%, over 40% of our bank's loans and deposits are run by branches. And recently, at the beginning of this year, the Finnish part of Danske Bank, Danish bank obviously, it announced that it's planning to branchificate its Finnish part too. And if all this happens, then roughly 50% of Finnish banking markets will be run by branches. And that's something which is not, that's something that was not thought in the European banking regulation laws. I mean that they are such a giant and we don't have good macroprudential tools for them. Okay, then the third thing related to the current situation is that last November, we, like many other countries, received a notice from Francisco and others, so the ESRB gave us a warning on medium-term vulnerabilities in housing and mortgage markets. So where we are now, what are our options as a policymaker? One option is to further strengthen the banking capital. Another one is to tighten loan restrictions to households. And of course, there's a possibility of having a combination of those two. So with this problem, what are the tools in our toolbox? What are we having now? We have a lot of tools related to strengthening of banking capital. We have the countercyclical capital buffer based on CRD4. We have the CRR articles 124 and 164 about risk weights and loss given default probabilities. We can use the CRR article 458 about strict national measures and so on. Then on the other hand, we have only one tool available for the which directly affects to the household side. It's a loan-to-value ratio, which was introduced in last July. And if I think, or when we think and when we thought about the suitability of the instruments available to address the current situation, it doesn't look that good. I mean that, first of all, there are a few arguments to use the countercyclical capital buffer. One major reason is that the so-called BIS indicator, the trend deviation, is actually negative currently. And also the supplementary risk indicators, they are not suggesting an increase in the vulnerabilities either. Then another possible option would be to apply the Article 164. But it's a problematic one. In our case, it probably would have a disproportionate effect on banks. It would probably adversely widen the difference in risk weight levels, increase the risk weights for some banks which already have high risk weights. So it doesn't sound a good idea, or at least the best possible idea. Then the third option, of course, would be to tighten the LTV ratio. In our case, the issue is so that the neutral level is 90%, and we have an option to tighten it down to 80%. But the problem is that our LTV is not really an LTV. It's an LTC. It's a loan to collateral. And that means that it's less efficient, it's easier to circumvent, and of course it, like other things, it addresses only to new loans. So what our board decided on at the end of March, they decided to apply the Article 458 of the CRR. So they decided to plan to introduce a 15% risk weight floor. And issue with that is that, okay, that's the best option available, but it will be a long process. So we decided that at the end of March that's what we're going to do, and it takes more or less like 6 months. So we have made a decision that that's our plan, to have that on from 1st January 2018. So 6 till 9 months. Then just a practical view of the current process, how these normal macroprudential decisions are done in Finland. I mentioned that the FSA is the competitive authority to do that, but we are having a good, tight cooperation with the Bank of Finland and also with the Ministry of Finance. So we more or less do a lot of preparatory work of the analyses with the experts from the bank and also from the Ministry of Finance. And then as a first stage, we have like a common discussion and proposition for the Director General of FSA. And then the Ministry of Social and Health Issues also gives a statement. But still it takes quite a long time that we have a first board discussion, then we have unofficial information to the ECB, preliminary discussion, another ECB consultation, and then the final decision by the board. So more or less we have these quarterly processes which take more or less 3 months each process. So doing a macroprudential policy currently is very time-consuming. One could even say that it's a bit cumbersome procedure. Okay, looking forward, I think I have said quite clearly that our current toolbox is far from being perfect. And in the previous session, the IMF presentation, there was mentioned there are 3 groups of macroprudential tools. The one which are focusing mainly on capital, the ones which are working with the LTV, and then the third group is related to loan to income or debt to income or debt to or that kind of instruments. And currently what we are having mainly our most instruments are located in the first set of those ones. So what is in the pipeline currently? Currently, the Ministry of Finance is submitting, or is to submit, a government proposal to the Parliament that we would introduce in Finnish legislation also the systemic risk buffer. For a reason or another reason, it wasn't introduced 2 years, 3 years ago when the other tools were taken in, but now it looks quite promising that that tool will be available probably by the end of this year. Then the second step is to develop this our loan-to-value, loan-to-collateral requirement further. I don't know, but I don't know it for 100% sure, but I think that we are the only EU country which is having an LTC measure, loan-to-collateral measure. So somehow or in many ways it's problematic. It would be better, at least we are arguing that it would be better to change it to LTV or do something else that it would be a bit more binding than it currently is. And then looking forward, we have ambitions to introduce these income-based macroprudential instruments. So we have been publicly spoken in favor of income-based instruments to support the macroprudential toolkit, and we are currently having discussions with the Ministry of Finance and other parties on the possibilities to introduce such instruments in our Finnish legislation. So this was pretty much what I had in my mind, so thank you.